Hey guys, Spirit of the Law here. A potential change to the ranked queue has been announced, and it's a little controversial. Normally, I wouldn't weigh in on something like this, but the post announcing it made a data-driven argument, which got my attention. They also showed a graph to make the argument, which motivated me to make my own graph in response. It'll be the first installment of my new original series, Epic Graph Battles of History. The big announcement is that the ranked deathmatch queue is potentially going to be removed entirely and replaced with a ranked Empire Wars queue in an upcoming patch. If you haven't seen it before, Empire Wars is a game mode where you start in Feudal Age with an economy already established. In this video, I want to look into the stats around how much each game mode is actually being played and the arguments on both sides for whether or not this is a good change. To start off with the official announcement, we get some insight into their reasoning and are given this graph showing the growth of ranked random map games in green since the release of Definitive Edition and the number of ranked deathmatch games being played over the same time period in orange. Notice there's a conspicuous lack of a y-axis, but the main idea is obviously that ranked random map games per month have been steadily increasing over a year and a half, and deathmatch is far less popular, which should come as a shock to no one. It tells a pretty different story than Steam charts though, which tracks how many people are playing the game through Steam over time. Aside from the March and April 2020 shutdown and a big spike around last Christmas, the player base has been pretty much steady, with a floor of around 20,000 concurrent players. Keep in mind this includes multi and single player, whereas Microsoft's graph shows ranked players only, and it makes sense that over time people picking up the game would start with single player and migrate to multiplayer over time. That could explain why the graphs don't line up, but to be honest, any graph without a scale is automatically a little sus. This is also from the same official site that says Spectator is a civilization with a 46% win rate, so I like to double check any official stats when possible. To dig a bit deeper and get the wider context, I went to AoE2.net and took a snapshot of the last 1,000 games started. Categorizing the types of games being played, this is what I found. Green here represents ranked, with light green representing 1 vs 1s, and dark green is team games. Yellow is quick play, which is actually less popular than I would have thought and explains its long queue times. Blue represents the unranked lobby games, and see the small sliver of red at the top? That's all the ranked deathmatch and team deathmatch games put together, 6 out of the 1,000 in total. Now this is a slightly misleading graph as it's the number of games started, but of course team games have more players in them. If I use a rough correction factor to capture how many people each game mode has on average and break things into smaller categories, we instead see that ranked team games in dark green are where about a third of the online players are at that instant. And this suggests about half of online players at any one time are in a ranked game of some sort. Most of the other half are in an unranked game, split roughly equally between games versus the AI in the darker blue and games without an AI present in the lighter blue. Quick play, custom scenarios, deathmatch, and Empire Wars altogether are about 10%. Now admittedly, this is a pretty rough estimate and just a single snapshot in time, but I think it puts some things into perspective. For another data point from AoE2.net, in the last 4 weeks, 230,000 players have played at least one unranked game, while 51,000 have played a ranked 1 vs 1 game and 84,000 have played a ranked team game. This is also just counting players with over 10 games of that type in total, so very casual players are not reflected in these numbers. Contrast all of that with the roughly 1,200 that have played a ranked deathmatch 1 vs 1 in the last month, and a similar number for deathmatch team games. That's not to dismiss or invalidate those players by any means, but it is an important bit of context in the discussion. But that raises the question, why is deathmatch so unpopular? There's an, I think, unfair perception that deathmatch is just a simplified version of the game where you don't have to worry about managing an economy. While it's true that you have a ton of resources, you really don't have infinite. So after some initial mashing of units, in reality, you do need to build an economy, secure resources on the map, take control of hills, and all the other things you get in a random map post-Imperial Age, minus researching techs. What I personally think actually holds deathmatch back from growing a bigger following isn't that it's too simple, it's that the start is too unforgiving. If you don't follow a very particular and optimized start, you can easily be overrun in the first 2 or 3 minutes, as opposed to a more standard game where even thoroughly outmatched, you probably have at least 10 minutes or so to enjoy the game. In deathmatch, a scout picking off 1 or 2 villagers immediately puts you at a massive disadvantage. It's a frustrating way to lose as well, as you have a ton of resources and units queued up, but you're just getting Lanchester Square Lawed to death. Of course, a well-populated queue would make sure people are against equal skill levels, but you still need to reach a critical mass of beginners for that to work. A few different ways to make it more beginner-friendly come to mind, which I'm sure a lot of veteran deathmatch players would hate and veto immediately. Things like removing the starting scout, a 5-minute treaty to start the game, or a defensive castle to give an early defender a slight advantage. The fact is, though, the game mode has been around so long, it's not going to be changed at this point without alienating the core community that's kept it alive. For those players, the early game issue doesn't exist to the same extent, as they know the meta of how to open, and for some people, the cutthroat, high-pressure kind of start to the game is even part of the appeal. That's my reasoning, at least for why Deathmatch has had a hard time attracting a larger casual player base. But it still leaves the question of why is it being replaced by Empire Wars specifically? Why not just remove Deathmatch and leave it at that, or add Regicide, Turbo Random, CBA, or any other game mode? To be blunt, it's not from popular demand, despite the official claim that it's popular and growing. As last time I checked, no one is really playing Empire Wars, despite being added to Quick Play. So what's the angle? The whole point is it cuts out the Dark Age and accelerates the game, which the official post claims is something people want in order to help them find time to play. In Empire Wars, you start with 27 villagers and standard resources. Do you play defensively and try to wall, invest in ecotechs, and save up to go straight to Castle Age in the first few minutes, or do you put down an archery range or stable to try to rush someone? Considering its feudal pressure though, it would be very impressive to see someone actually eliminated or forced to resign in the first 5 or even 10 minutes. Unlike Deathmatch, which I think can magnify small differences in each player's start, quickly leading to a runaway game between even similarly skilled players, with each player having so many villagers, even if one person is making better choices, it takes a while for that to accumulate into a commanding lead. That feature could actually work to its advantage in matchmaking between a smaller player pool. The fact it feels similar to a random map as well, I think also helps players confidently jump in as they have some intuition about how to play. There's also the whole argument about whether or not it's more entertaining to watch, as it removes the slower early game. Either way, having a faster paced game mode for entertainment's sake is likely a factor in why Empire Wars specifically has been pushed into the spotlight. Now, I also want to address the comments below the post, and as you'd expect, there's quite a bit of pushback from Deathmatch players. There's comments calling it a slap in the face, tone deaf and out of touch, disastrous, no words for how upset I feel. It's a little rough down there, and I'll generously say 10% of the commenters were in favor of the proposed hard swap. Of course, comments like this are from people who feel the most passionately about it, but the majority opinion on a community poll I posted as well was that both maps should be included. The only argument against that I can see is that splitting up players can add to queue times, though that's difficult to predict without actually trying it. So altogether, they really have 3 options. The first is what they're planning: remove Deathmatch and add an Empire Wars rank queue. This replaces something that has a small but dedicated following with a game mode that has been available already and so far no one is really playing. They're counting on it becoming significantly more popular, and this is definitely the most controversial approach as we've seen. The second option is to simply remove the Deathmatch rank queue and not add Empire Wars, because as they say, there aren't enough players for a healthy queue. It's suggested that some of the core players have moved to hosting Deathmatch in the unranked lobby already, though I would need to hear from one of those people if that's actually true. At least with this option, they could show the graph and say it had a year to attract players and just didn't catch on. The final option is, of course, to include both. That gives Empire Wars a chance, without also making a big bet that it's going to do better than Deathmatch. It could be as simple as a toggleable option on the regular queue, and after matchmaking, if it finds everyone has selected it, then you get an Empire Wars start instead of the standard Dark Age. I expect elo rating between random map and Empire Wars is probably strongly correlated. At a certain point, the game settings menu does get a bit cluttered, but it's probably the least controversial option with potentially no impact on queue times. Importantly, it avoids replacing one game mode with another and creating an immediate comparison between them. But that's just my take on the whole situation. Personally, I think Empire Wars is fun and underrated. It's perfect for a group of friends whose skill levels are all over the place by giving everyone a solid foundation. I'd be happy to see it catch on, but I'd also love for them to keep the Deathmatch queue as well and listen to the feedback they're getting. That's all for this one though. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you next time.